Welcome back, historians. Today we're talking about the sectional crisis in American art. Now, when we're looking at something as significant as the sectional crisis, the 1840s to the 1860s, that 20-year period or so leading us up to the American Civil War, it's just crucial that we consider primary sources. And of course, primary sources, we could look at legal cases, we could look at speeches, we could read newspaper articles, but wouldn't it be nice to see some visual representations of the sectional crisis? Well, if I could, I'd give you photography. And in fact, I do offer a couple photographs, but photography, as we know of it now, wasn't really invented until the 1860s. And in fact, some of the earliest photos that were ever taken were taken during the American Civil War. So if we're looking at the 1840s, we don't really have photos to choose from, but we have the next best thing. We have artwork, paintings, sculptures, drawings, cartoons, lithographs, all sorts of opportunities abound when we look at American art. Now, today's lecture is going to introduce you, or maybe reintroduce you to the sectional crisis. It's going to give you some direction around what to expect when looking at American artwork pertaining to the sectional crisis. And most importantly, it's going to give you a four-step approach to historicizing or judging American artwork pertaining to the sectional crisis. Now, this is crucial because it's not just about looking at a painting, for example, and assuming what the story is. It's about investigating a piece and evaluating it as a historian. Let's get started. As always, I'm your hostess, Dr. Summer Cherland. Let's start with context. As always, when we talk about the sectional crisis, we are talking about roughly 20 years or so, from the 1840s to the 1860s. Now, not everyone says that this period in American history is called the sectional crisis. Some historians call it the antebellum period. Some historians look at it as a period of westward expansion. The reason I like the idea of sectional crisis is because it involves all three components of the American empire at the time. And it has to do with mounting tensions, increasing conflict, eventually irreconcilable differences. So when we're looking at artwork that was created or relevant during this period, 1840s to 1860s or so, I want you to remember the equation. The North, which is very wealthy and for the most part, a free state, a set of free states. So this means that they really emphasized free labor, all right? So they're emphasizing the importance of paid labor. At the time, this might surprise you to know because the North, ultimately, we know of them as the Union when the Civil War breaks out. But at the time, the North is actually the federal underdog when it comes to federal politics. The South, on the other hand, is the federal big dog. This is a slave-holding empire. They are also incredibly wealthy. Both sections, as you know from King Cotton, North and South, have experienced extreme wealth, but both due to slavery. The South is more obviously tied to slavery because they don't pay their workers. The North, it's a little bit more covert because they don't get raw materials to produce cotton textiles, cloth, and clothing unless the South imports cotton for them. And then you add the West, which these two sections, North and South, believe is up for grabs. But of course, we know it's not really up for grabs. People actually live there already. And ultimately, what you have are these mounting tensions and irreconcilable differences. There are two factors to consider when we look at the sectional crisis. Factor number one is westward expansion. Western and westward expansion created problems from the very start. Battles emerged over the expansion of slavery and over the interests of enslavers versus abolitionists. Many believed the West represented the moral future of the empire. So what was this West? What was this moral future? And the key examples when we look at westward expansion are the Mexican-American War and the admittance of California because it led to the Compromise of 1850. Factor number two has to do with who runs the empire. It's not just the South wants to control the West and the North wants to control the West. It's that the North may think that, for example, the states within the West should make the determination, and the South may think, for example, that the federal government makes that call. So it's also about the consolation or the crystallization of power. So the question is, the fate of slavery was at the heart of American politics, particularly as this US empire expanded. And after decades of conflict, North and South Americans began to fear that the opposite section, Southerners feared North, Northerners feared South. They believed that the opposite folks of the country had seized control of the government and that that government was going to decide the fate of slavery. And the key examples we have here are the Missouri Compromise and the aforementioned Compromise of 1850, as well as Bleeding Kansas. So as a reminder or refresher, the sectional crisis defined when we look at who, this involves Northerners, Southerners, federal and state lawmakers, enslaved men, women, and children, and global philosophers. These are all the people, believe it or not, who are involved in the sectional crisis. What it was a battle over the future, right? It was a battle over slavery and the future of the American government, society, economy, and culture, all because of expansion into the West. When 1840s to 1860s with caveats, right? So this has to do with like we kind of creep into the 1860s, we kind of creep into the 1830s. So just generally, we're looking at 1840s to 1860s, right? And when it comes to American artwork, there are some exceptions. There may be, for example, a piece that I introduced to you that was created in, say, the 1810s, but it becomes relevant in the 1840s. So we're looking at that block as the biggest chunk of time with regard to the sectional crisis, but we know that there are a few caveats here and there. And where? North free, South pro-slavery, both are super wealthy, and they think the West is up for grabs. It involves America overall. Why does it matter? Why does Dr. C keep pushing us on this concept of the sectional crisis? Well, it helps us evaluate this question about whether or not the Civil War was inevitable. Was it going to occur no matter what? Let's look at 3 examples of artwork during this period that are promoting a Northern perspective, a Southern perspective, or a perspective on or about the American West. Now, the North, you're going to see 3 or 4 kind of central themes. King Cotton is a little bit of a special one, but let's look at the top 3. You're going to see a lot on abolitionism and anti-slavery. This is tied to spiritual revivalism and intellectual elitism. This idea that America was an empire and that America was ordained by God from as back far as its roots in the 1620s, and that it was also an elite entity, that America had risen above the base kind of motivations that included slavery. You'll see images, or you may see paintings or sculpture or architecture that are celebrating this intellectual elitism and are referencing even America's colonial roots, like you see this one. This is created in 1869, but the title itself is about the Pilgrims of the 1620s. You're also going to see some examples of like racial competition. So slavery was blamed for suppressing wages and creating land theft that could have benefited poor white Americans who, from the beginning of America, were set to achieve economic independence through land ownership. Now, that may surprise you, as well as this next one. Did you know that the idea of states' rights as a Civil War conflict actually was a rallying cry for the North at first and later became a Southern rallying cry? The North believed that if every new territory in the West was allowed to establish for itself whether or not it would be free or slaveholding, that would be actually the better balance of power when it came to the federal government. Really, the South believed that the federal government needed to help protect the institution of slavery. And now you're going to see King Cotton, right? Southern wealth and Northern wealth is locked together no matter what we're looking at. What about in the South? There's really 2 primary key components that are happening when it comes to Southern experiences of the sectional crisis. The first are fears, right? They're fearful. They're worried about abolitionists. They're worried that Northerners are going to dominate Congress and the federal government. They also believe that without federal protection, not state protection or local protection, but federal protection would allow of slavery would allow for a constant system of peace that would protect from a bloody insurrection, a race war, runaways, and rebellion. They believed the federal command, right? They believed that federal oversight would protect the institution of slavery. And much like the North, they likened American democracies to elite historic empires like the Greek and Roman empires. That's because both Greek and Roman democracy systems and philosophical systems allowed for, and in many cases, celebrated the institution of slavery. Did you know that the South initially wanted more federal oversight, but turned to states' rights later? And then King Cotton, you see that again, extreme wealth for both the South and the North. But in the South, it's concentrated among a few, but it dominated the entire region. And then finally, when we see artwork pertaining to or describing or emphasizing the West, we see examples like this one created in 1847 called The Last of the Race. It's this idea, this promotional campaign, which is of course false, that Native American populations would essentially become extinct, that as America expanded west, that Native people would die out. This has to do with this idea of managing new territories, massive amounts of land. After the Mexican American War, America got like 100% more territory than it had before. So there's massive amounts of land which must be governed. And there was a lot of questions around this. Should we have the states control this? Should territories vote for themselves? Federal oversight? The West was home to extreme wealth and resources, including most predominantly land, but also raw materials like lumber and water and different animals that could be hunted. And there comes up a problem, a question about the treatment of other humans living in the West. These are primarily Mexicans and Native Americans, but also Hispanos, Californios, and Tejanos. This is all tied to manifest destiny, the belief that God had ordained, the spiritual mandate had actually ordained Americans to expand west and deal with the consequences. The West was seen as the opportunity for the moral authority of America to win out. But then that's the question. Well, which one wins? The North or the South? Pro-slavery or anti-slaver? Here's a really good quote from the American Yop that also tells us that the sectional crisis has global implications. Across the world, people are questioning the future of slavery. Prior to the American Revolution, nearly everyone in the world accepted slavery as a natural part of life. But then enslaved workers and political theorists and philosophers began to rethink these natural law justifications for slavery. They rejected a long-standing idea that slavery was a condition that naturally suited some people. A new transatlantic anti-slavery movement began to argue that instead freedom was the natural condition of humankind. You're going to see all of this in our artwork today. So here's some basics. When I select pieces that represent artwork of the sectional crisis, here are some basics. One, they have to be created or relevant in the 1840s or 1860s, 1840s to 1860s. So that's crucial to me. It either has to be created during that period or increasingly relevant during that period. You might be surprised to know that I selected a few global artists as well as US artists. So you might see American artists, you'll see a preponderance of American artists, but there are a couple British people that I included as well. But primarily the people that are being kind of called to consider this artwork, the audience per se, they're American. And they might be paintings, drawings, sculpture, architecture. You'll see the words lithograph, you might see cartoons, you might see wood, right? Wood on canvas or color on wood, for example. Those are paintings. Almost every one of them has some version of American exceptionalism, comparing America to great democracies and empires in one way or another. What about themes? Well, you're going to see one of three things. You're going to see artwork that is about the North, presenting abolitionism and a disdain for slavery. You're going to see artwork that is either about or from Southern artists. Now, these are harder to find, believe it or not, because they are categorized through museums as kind of like in a different way, in part because of the legacy, as we should be critiquing this legacy. Now, these artists typically promoted the benefits of paternalism, remember, kind of controlling people for their own good, and the propaganda that presented happy slaves, people who were living under slavery and enjoying themselves, and that it was really meant to promote the institution of slavery as a good thing. And then finally, you might see the West as portrayed as a battleground. And maybe this isn't necessarily a negative battleground, but it was a place where these problems were being worked out. You might see examples of opportunities of expansion or the plight of Indigenous peoples. Now, when you look at a piece of artwork, it is really common to look right at it and say, here's what's happening in this piece. But guess what? That is not what you are going to do as a historian with this assignment. Instead, you have 4 steps. You have to take 4 steps and you have to take them in order for you to properly historicize artwork as a primary source. Number 1, describe. You are going to identify the textual, observable facts: title, date, artist, and medium. When was it made? What's it called? Who created it? And what is it? Is it sculpture? Is it a drawing? Is it a building? Is it a painting? That's what the word medium means. Then you're going to analyze. When you analyze, you're looking for artistic elements. I'm talking light, I'm talking shading, I'm talking color and figures, right? Is it dark? Is it bright? Where is the light focusing on in this image? What colors are used? Is it primarily blues and grays? Is it primarily reds and yellows? What kind of figures are in this image? Now, this is when you get to sort of make a couple inferences, because sometimes artistic abstraction could be a little bit unclear. But like, basically tell me, is this a landscape? Are there people in this painting or this image? Is it a bowl of fruit, right? What's in the actual image that you see? And then this is where you kind of squeak or tiptoe into the next part, which is, tell me what the mood is of this piece. Is this piece celebratory? Is it romantic? Is it happy? Is it scared? Is it sad? Is it ominous? What are you seeing in terms of the feeling of this piece? And then, and only then, can you enter into step 3. This is when you, as a historian, get to interpret the story that the artist is trying to tell. And this is where it is crucial that you, as a historian, know the context of this piece. Now, I just spent 10 minutes telling you the context. The context is the sectional crisis. If it's a piece from the North, then you know a little bit of its context in terms of the sectional crisis. If it's a piece from the South, then you know some different context. And if it's a piece portraying the West, still more context from a different perspective. You tell me now what you think this story is in this piece. What is this artist trying to tell? And you have to include context in order for it to make any sense as a primary source. And then finally, this is when you get to judge it. This is when you historicize this piece. Now, when I say judge, I'm like, you could say whether you like it or not. And if you were an art dealer, judging it would mean putting a value on the piece. How much is it worth in terms of money? But as a historian, you're telling me what its historic worth is. What does this piece tell us about whatever, right? What does this piece tell us about the Northern perspective on the sectional crisis? What does this piece tell us about the role of the West in the sectional crisis? Now, the more specific you are to the section that you're describing, the better your grade's going to be. Here's my favorite example that I did not assign for this class because it's actually a 5-part piece. This is Thomas Cole, who created a series of paintings called The Course of Empire. He painted these in the 1830s, but they were increasingly relevant by the 1840s. Now, what you see is Cole's interpretation of how empires go from what he called the savage state, which is really wilderness, all the way to desolation, which is a return in some ways to wilderness. So they go in order. The savage state is first, the Arcadian state is next, consummation, destruction, and desolation. All right? I am going to give you an example. Let's try looking at Cole's piece using our 4-step process. Number 1, describe. This is done by Thomas Cole. It's called Destruction, and it's part of a 5-part series of Empire, right? And it was done in 1836. It's oil on canvas. Do you see that I still have not told you anything that's happening in this image? I just told you what it is. Now I analyze. Let's look for colors: creams, grays, oranges, teals. Let's look at light. All right, the light, that's where the kind of the brighter parts are of this piece. I see architecture on the left, a little bit on the right. I see the light concentrated right in the middle where there's just like a bunch of people, it appears. I see, do you notice this one right here where there's a woman who looks like she's maybe being like pushed or something? Like you can see her movement right here. There's light concentrated here. So when you're looking for light, typically there are two components that artists use when trying to show you their focal point of a piece. And one is light and one is the center. There's almost always something of value right around the center of the piece. Now, it might, like in this one, be a little bit lower or a little bit to the right, but it's always somewhere around here is worth looking for. What figures do I see? I see people, I see buildings, I see the horizon. I see, in my opinion, the mood of this piece is intense, it's dark, and it's ominous. Now, you'll notice I have not told you yet what I think Thomas Cole is trying to say until now. Now I get to interpret. Okay. Thomas Cole, this is the fourth, I believe, part of a five-part series, and this one is called Destruction of Empire. And he's shown the same landscape from Arcadian or pastoral, oh no, savage to Arcadian to consummation to destruction. And that's where we're at right now. Destruction is the fourth piece in a five-part series on the evolution of an empire from wilderness to zenith and back. Cole presents a cautionary tale, likening America to the Roman and Greek empires. Do you see how he uses architectural details like these columns to represent kind of a vaguely Greek or Roman empire? This sculpture, for example, that he paints in this top right corner, that really emphasizes sort of Greek or Roman artwork. But it's illustrating the tragedies that might befall America during this critical period. So, for example, you can't really tell what's happening, but it doesn't look good, right? It looks like there's kind of like a lot of chaos. It looks like there's people falling or hurt, being thrown, like this woman thrown over the side of a cliff. These people look like they've been, injured quite a bit, maybe killed. This looks like warfare to me. Now I'm going to historicize it. I believe Cole's piece shows us how Americans, like him, were considering the potential pitfalls of America becoming an empire. That it went from being this savage wilderness that this is what they assumed the New World was before European arrival. And then it kind of became like small farming communities. And then it became this huge empire that got too big for its britches. And now here's where it's at in terms of destruction. Now I want you to try. You are going to select a piece of artwork. You're going to begin by describing, analyzing, and interpreting one sentence each. And then you're going to historicize. What does it tell us about the sectional crisis? Does it emphasize the North, the South, or the West, and how so? And I'm looking for about 3 sentences. Now, before you do that, you may be asked to do a quick knowledge check on the 4 steps of historicizing artwork, so do that first. But quickly thereafter, you're going to be doing these 3 things. Good luck.